The first character for my name is Han, which means to accompany. And the second is To, or in the compound it's pronounced Do, and that means to cross over. People in Japan are not at all bashful about asking where you're going, where you're from. And when they ask me about myself, one of the major self-identifications that I give is that I'm a pilgrim. And the great pilgrimage of my life was to go to Japan. In fact, a pilgrim is a very interesting word. It comes from Latin, per agere, your field, your place. And per means to go, to away. So when you go away from your field and your place, you're a pilgrim. And without realizing exactly why I was going to Japan, I was on pilgrimage the whole time I was there. In fact, I've been on pilgrimage all my life. The field that I went from is California. I'm a native Californian. I was born in an unincorporated part of San Mateo County, right here, and did all my schooling until I graduated from high school in Bellarmine College Prep in San Jose, and then I entered the Jesuits. I wasn't even 18 years old in 1938. And at that time, even then, I knew that what I was really interested in was the spiritual path. I wasn't interested in becoming a priest, and I was really interested in spirituality. I was even a pilgrim on the pilgrim path, even at that time. And that meant, for me, my first 2 years of high school, I was going to become a Cistercian brother, a Trappist monk. But that dream faded, and then in my last 2 years of high school, I realized that I really didn't know where I wanted to go, and the Jesuits were the closest accessible religious community to go into, and a number of my friends were also going in, so I just tagged along. And I was insecure, I wasn't sure, but it was the right decision. And then after 15 years of Jesuit training, after ordination as a priest, on the 8th of August, 1953, I sailed through the Golden Gate. I went on a cargo liner to Manila, and then Hong Kong, and then Japan. Going to Japan, just physically, was by no means the real pilgrimage. The real pilgrimage was going into an entirely different consciousness, an entirely different culture, a different language, and eventually into a different religion. From the very first moment in Japan, I was fascinated by the Japanese consciousness. I knew that there was something different, and it was something that I wanted. Of course, although I say that I really didn't know why I went to Japan, that's on the interior level. On the external level, I was sent by the California Jesuits to help to build and start a junior-senior high school in Hiroshima. And we did that. And one day, when I was even teaching there, I taught there for 6 years, I was walking with a fellow Jesuit, a man by the name of Tom Charbonneau, a sociologist. And we were talking, and suddenly he said, we're marginal men. And that has stuck with me ever since. That's one of the ways that I really identify myself. I was very aware that I could never really be a middle-of-the-road, ordinary Japanese. so that I'm on the margin of Japan, I'm on the margin of the language, I'm on the margin of the culture, I'm on the margin of the religions. And on the other hand, I'm really on the margin of being an American. I'm not an ordinary, middle-of-the-road American. I'm kind of on the margin there. And even in the Jesuits, I'm somewhat of a marginal person, although with all my heart, I'm a Jesuit. And there's many facets of my life where I literally have 1 foot here and 1 foot there, and that is why I can be a bridge. And so that is one of the major identifications that I have of myself, is that I'm a bridge. Even the clothes that I'm wearing, this bottom half, this kind of skirt that I use for sitting in meditation, is the bottom half of a Jesuit cassock. And the top half is Zen monk's work coat. And so that in itself is a very symbol of what I am. And to be a bridge, then, you have to have a margin in one side and the other side. And this is well brought out in the name that some young religious gave me. And we were having supper, and I said, look, couldn't you give me a Japanese name, a way of writing my name in real Japanese? Because you can take my name, Hand, cannot be pronounced in Japanese. The ha is not a Japanese sound. It has to be ha, han. And no Japanese word ends in a consonant like di, and so it turns out to be hando. And so they took han and do and gave me 2 beautiful characters. And the upper character means to accompany. And the second character, do, the upper character is han, the second one is do, and that means to cross over. So I accompany people crossing over. That also has the bridge idea. Crossing over, so that I even now, my main work is to accompany Westerners to cross over, get some of the insights from the East, and integrate them into their lives. So I was teaching at Hiroshima, and I taught from the very first students that came in, the first little boys coming into junior high school. And I was a very successful teacher. Even brought kids to national championships in English-speaking contests and things like that. But I don't know how many times I stood at my window in the Jesuit residence there on the campus, looking down on the ball field where the kids were playing and the road where their parents were coming up the hill to the school. And I just said to myself, this isn't me. And finally, after 6 years, I just couldn't stand it anymore. I said, I just knew this isn't me. This isn't where I'm supposed to be. So one day I stopped and I said, well, what is me? And I reflected that every time I had directed a retreat, and I was giving retreats mainly in English in Japan all those first 8 or 9 years, every time I had given a retreat, almost without exception, I literally stood at a window and looked out, just reflecting and saying, and said to myself, this is me. And so it was very clear that that's what I was supposed to get into. And just at that time, sure enough, the Jesuit provincial, the superior, came through, and I told him this story, and he said, look, would you like to go up back to the language school and be the spiritual director of the language students? And I said yes. And there at the language school, I was able to do more study of the language, learned more about the consciousness that created the language, and it was from the language school building And then during that time that I walked literally walked down the road to an old temple called Jo-Myoji, where the Zen group that I entered was sitting at that time, and began the study of Zen, the great learning process of my whole life. So when I walked down the hill to go into the Zendo, I really didn't know what I was going to do, what I was doing. Again, I was just following my gut feeling. It was the first step in the great battle to take me out of my head. And the Jesuit training that had kept me in my head for so long, this was bringing me down in a very real sense to my gut. At any rate, it was not easy ever to go to the Zendo. And it was very hard work. But something drew me. And it reached a kind of a clarification when, at the end of about 3 months, when I had gone through all the introductory lectures and I had shown that I was earnest about sitting, I went through the little ceremony called Sho-Ken. Sho means mutual, and Ken means seeing. So the Zen master sees me and looks at me, and I look at the Zen master. From that meeting, I become his disciple in all things concerning Zen. And so we went through the little ceremony. I remember there was a candle. There were about 3 of us, and we all gave candles or something. And then each one of us was individually, had an individual interview with the Zen master. And his only real question was about my kokorozashi, which means the intention of my heart. What was my aspiration for Zen? And I really didn't know. As I said, I didn't know why I had gone there. I just knew I had to go. And so I finally came up with, I gave him the answer finally. I said, well, kodo, which means integration. And he didn't know what I meant, and I didn't know what I meant. And so I said, well, I'm a Christian. I intend to live and die as one, but there's something here in Zen for him. He says, oh, he says, yes. He says, you're a Christian. He says, yes, there are 2 kinds of Zen. There's Buddhist Zen, and with all the statues and all the sutras and all the teachings, all is Buddhist. And then there's just Zen. Real deep meditation. He says, you do Zen and you'll be a better Christian. And that's exactly what happened. What I'm teaching is what I learned in Zen, the primacy of experience. And that means the primacy of awareness, becoming aware of reality. And the great experience, the primacy of experience, the great experience is mindfulness. And meditation is a concentrated training in mindfulness. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm teaching meditation. The last 9 years I was in Japan, I taught at a junior college. And while I was there, I was teaching English, of course, but I got into teaching these Japanese students to write haiku in English, their own native, one of their major types of poetry in English. And it was a lot of fun. But that only was a manifestation of the fascination I had had for many years with haiku. And so even to this day, I still read haiku a lot, more than write, and appreciate them. And I teach haiku, writing in English. But above all, I teach the spirituality of haiku. Haiku as a path, a spiritual path. Because a haiku comes out of direct experience. A haiku is direct experience directly expressed. Take, for example, the most famous of all haiku writers, Basho. One day Basho was on one of his travels up in the northern part of Japan, and he was up in Yamagata Prefecture and came to what is simply called Yamadera, the mountain temple. And it was a summer day, very hot, and the only thing that was moving were the wings of the cicadas making their summer sound. And he sat there and was totally taken over by the silence and by the sound. And so he wrote a haiku, Shizukasa ya, iwa ni shimiiru, semi no koe. Shizukasa is, oh, the stillness. Iwa ni shimiiru, into the rocks it pierces. Semi no koe, the sound of the cry of the cicada. Oh, the stillness, into the rocks it pierces, the cry of the cicada. Now that little poem is a good example of the oneness of all creation, because any direct experience of reality at any real depth will come to see the interrelatedness, the actual oneness of all reality, so that there is only one flow. What is it that pierces the rocks? That is the one action. The stillness pierces the rocks. The cry of the cicada pierces the rocks. So you have stillness and cicada coming together in one action, and all things come together in one flow. That is the spirituality of haiku. It was while I was still living at our language school there in Kamakura in Japan in the foothills, I started building a path. I love to go out and work in the earth. In fact, my middle name is George. And George means worker of the earth. We had a fairly good-sized piece of property there for Japanese standards, and it was all on the side of a hill and a little valley. And so I made a path all the way around that valley, and it took me about 6 or 7 years. And I named it the Path of the White Dragon. At that time, I was fascinated by dragons, and there was a little cave down in the valley there, this tiny valley, where there was lots of water, and that's where dragons are supposed to live. Ever since that time, I've been building paths everywhere I go. So in the 15 years that I've been here at Mercy Center, I've made paths all around the property, which are meditation paths, contemplation paths right to this day. It culminated in the building of the labyrinth. We use no machinery, just human energy, so it's full of good human energy. And now the labyrinth is literally, truly a spiritual path. You go this way, and then you go back that way, and then you go a short way this way, and then you go way around there. And so you're taken out of your linear thinking. And when you're taken out of your linear, ordinary thinking, there's a chance for deeper insight to arise. Literally hundreds of people have already walked that labyrinth and come to real experiences. In fact, in the retreat that we just had about 2 weeks ago, a lady walked the labyrinth. She came to the big stone that we put in the center, and she put her hands on the stone, and everything dropped away. And then she came back, and the stone and she were one, and then everything and she were one. A real deep, fine, literally a Zen-type enlightenment experience. The text that we have been using for these Wednesday night talks is the famous poem, really, written in rather, for the time, ordinary Japanese by the great 17th century Zen master Hakuin. He says, "For the person who does one sitting session, 1 hour of true Zazen, the accumulated, immeasurable waywardness, sins, tsumi, sins, will all be annihilated." And what is he speaking about? The main thing is to remember what sin means to a Japanese Buddhist, to a Buddhist in general. We have to get out of our Western idea of sin, because we were taught as little children that sin is an offense against God. And in a sense, it makes God angry. And then we've got to pay back and do something to atone for that sin. That's not what sin means here. It doesn't mean sin in the Western sense. It means basically waywardness, being off the mark. And so, when he says that all your sins are wiped away by one sitting, he means that all our waywardness are simply gone. Horobu means to perish. They're gone. Now, where are our sins? Every action that we perform goes into our individual human energy form field as into a memory bank. Every action that you have ever done, good or bad, is still part of your energy field, your being, your ising. It also goes into the universal human energy form field. Everything that you do and ever done in your life, ever will do, influences the whole of the human race. And so that is there in the field. However, if you sit and really go into true meditation, you go into what we like to call the flow. There's one great movement. It is our fundamental life movement, our life force in action. And that movement comes directly from the formless divine source, and we are nothing but that movement manifesting in this hour of sitting. And when we forget all our waywardness, we forget everything, and just allow our heart, the attention of our heart, to bring us into that one flow, then we're pure. We are impeccable. And I was thinking about this today, and I realized that when I was in theology, studying theology up near Los Gatos for 4 years, we were taught that if a person really turns to God with all their heart and just really turns to God, by that very act, all their sins are forgiven. And then, well, legalistically, and the church loves legalism, legalistically you should go and submit those sins to the confession. But they're already all forgiven. They're all forgiven. And then it's interesting that Hakuin uses the very word pure land. Jodo sunawachi to karasu, which means the pure land. Indeed, the pure land is not far away. You have already come into that state to which you are trying to go. Pure land means that is the Buddhist heaven. And it's called pure because there is no waywardness there. And if we allow ourselves in meditation to really let everything go, and just by watching your breathing, by saying the Jesus prayer, by doing centering prayer, whatever your focus of attention is, if you really do it, forget everything else, and you will be taken into the pure land. You have already reached where you are trying to go. And the reason why we have to keep doing this is because we don't stay. We slip back. But it's a beautiful text today, this evening, to show us what a wonderful thing it is to sit. So, as we always say at the end, let's sit. The Buddhist insights have had a profound effect upon me, and to such an extent that I have literally not only become a better Christian in that I meditate and so forth better, but that my whole understanding of Christianity has been enlightened, profound enlightenment. And I have a much better and a much deeper understanding of what Christianity is all about because of Buddhism. And so that's why I call myself a Buddhist Christian. I'm a Christian, but I have got a lot of Buddhism in me, and I'm very happy to be such a person. The first character for my name is Han, which means to accompany. And the second is To, or in the compound it's pronounced Do, and that means to cross over. People in Japan are not at all bashful about asking where you're going, where you're from. And when they ask me about myself, one of the major self-identifications that I give is that I'm a pilgrim, and a different language, and eventually into a different religion. From the very first moment in Japan, I was fascinated by the Japanese consciousness. I knew that there was something different, and it was something that I wanted. Of course, although I say that I really didn't know why I went to Japan, that's on the interior level. On the external level, I was sent by the California Jesuits to help to build and start a junior-senior high school in Hiroshima. And we did that. And one day, when I was even teaching there, I taught there for 6 years, I was walking with a fellow Jesuit, a man by the name of Tom Charbonneau, a sociologist. I really didn't know where I wanted to go, and the Jesuits were the closest accessible religious community to go into, and a number of my friends were also going in, so I just tagged along. And I was insecure, I wasn't sure, but it was the right decision. And then after 15 years of Jesuit training, after ordination as a priest, on the 8th of August, 1953, I sailed through the Golden Gate. I went on a cargo liner to Manila, and then Hong Kong, and then Japan. Going to Japan, just physically, was by no means the real pilgrimage. The real pilgrimage was going into an entirely different consciousness, an entirely different culture. The great pilgrimage of my life was to go to Japan. In fact, a pilgrim is a very interesting word. It comes from Latin, per agere, your field, your place. And per means to go, to away. So when you go away from your field and your place, you're a pilgrim. And without realizing exactly why I was going to Japan, I was on pilgrimage the whole time I was there. In fact, I've been on pilgrimage all my life. The field that I went from is California. I'm a native Californian. I was born in an unincorporated part of San Mateo County, right here, and did all my schooling until I graduated from high school in Bellarmine College Prep in San Jose, and then I entered the Jesuits. I wasn't even 18 years old in 1938. And at that time, even then, I knew that what I was really interested in was the spiritual path. I wasn't interested in becoming a priest, and I was really interested in spirituality. I was even a pilgrim on the pilgrim path, even at that time. And that meant, for me, my first 2 years of high school, I was going to become a Cistercian brother, a Trappist monk. But that dream faded, and then in my last 2 years of high school, I realized that